Before we start the video, I recently created a YouTube membership for my channel. You can be a member by hitting the join button next to the subscribe button under the video. I have a level you can join at as low as 99 cents. By becoming a YouTube member, you get cool badges, and when you comment on my videos, I see it all the time, and I will respond and heart your comment. I also have a Patreon out there too, so whichever service is more comfortable for you, you can join. I really appreciate every single one of you, and I will continue to make you proud. Thank you all, and let's start the video.
Welcome to the world of Tales from the Trip.
What I did in the winter of 2005 in a small town is something I will never do again. I regret ever having done it, and yet, it was perhaps the most interesting time of my life. For a time, I was the essence of delirium. For about a year, I had been smoking pot on a daily basis, and in that time had tried the usual psychoactives, shrooms, acid, salvia, Hawaiian baby wood roast, and my favorite, ecstasy. So one night, my friend, let's call him Ryan, and I had been planning to get some rolls for about a month now, and had found someone to hook us up. But the day before I got the phone call, no parent, or in this case, stoner, ever wants to get, my dealer got tickets to a concert at the last minute and was out of state. We tried to call everyone we had ever met to find a hookup, but to no avail. So we started walking down the street to our local restaurant, and along the way, I noticed a white trumpet-shaped flower growing in some bushes on the side of the road. Ryan and I both identified it as Datura, and decided to snap a pod off of one. We went to the restaurant, and I decided to eat 10 seeds. Since we didn't know what it would do to us, I decided to take them, and Ryan would be my sitter. We finished our food, and walked home. As soon as we got back to my house, I started feeling very paranoid. We went into the living room and started watching the movie Groundhog Day, and as we watched, I kept forgetting that Ryan was there, and would become scared and leave the room every time I looked at him. I went into the kitchen and started pouring water into a glass, but started to notice things about my kitchen that I hadn't noticed before. There were spider webs in the corner of the ceiling, and the floor was split in the center. I screamed and ran into the living room where Ryan had finished watching the movie and asked if he could smoke in here. I said he could and curled up under some covers on my couch. About 3 minutes later, I took the covers off of my face and noticed Ryan pulling a cigarette out of his pocket and asking if I had a lighter. I picked one off of the floor sitting next to me and handed it to him. However, when I asked for it back, he said he had thrown it at me. I didn't think anything of it, knowing that I could find it later, but soon, Ryan's cigarette fell out of his hand. I told Ryan that he dropped it on his lap and he freaked out. He began rolling on the ground, and before he could roll over the cigarette, it disappeared. I suddenly remembered I had taken Datura and asked Ryan if he had. He said he had eaten 12 seeds without telling me. I realized we had shared an illusion and got extremely frightened. I ran up my stairs, which seemed to go on forever, and every time I tried to get to the top step, it would slide out from under me. I finally gave up, but managed to somehow slide to the top of the stairs. I got up and ran into my bedroom and fell down on the floor. I slowly got up, and then suddenly I realized that I was in my room with my old friend from high school. Let's call him Bobby. I started reminiscing with him about the crazy times we had, and I started to roll a joint. I started to light it up, and Bobby said we should go out onto the roof to smoke it. We went out my window and sat on the roof and started hitting what had now become a bong. Then, as he passed it to me, it suddenly dropped off the roof, and I leaned into the gutter to try to catch it before I managed to completely fall off. Luckily, I blacked out. I was woken up 3 hours later by police sirens as the police pulled into the front of my yard. I stumbled into the window and ran out of my room to find Ryan. I ran down the stairs and saw him passed out in the bathroom, in the bathtub, with his wrists bleeding. I smashed the mirror in the bathroom with my fist for some reason and ran out the back door and into the cornfield in the back of my yard. I kept running through the stalks until I got to the deepest, darkest spot in the forest of corn. I knelt down to hide from the police, but I kept hearing dogs barking and could see distant stalks moving. I started crying into my hands, and when I removed them, Ryan was there with me. He told me to run with him to the distant caves, and I ran with him. But we were in a jungle now. This shit was weird. I woke up in my backyard about 2 hours later, underneath a wheelbarrow. I went inside and found Ryan not to be there, and I was still tripping. I realized that my life was like Groundhog Day, and that I could kill myself and come back the next day. So I ran my head into the wall 3 times and lost consciousness. I awoke again in an alley outside of the restaurant. How did I get here? The next thing I remember is walking home and seeing some very frightening faces along the sides of the road. I walked into a parking lot next to my house and leaned up against an SUV and passed out. The next thing I remember, I was in the SUV flying down the highway. I had gotten into the car somehow and started it and began seeing vampires flying around the car. I slammed on the brakes and ran into the woods nearby, pursued by the same vampires, and clawed at a tree until my fingers bled, and sat there shivering, hallucinating, until sleep reclaimed me. I woke up and began walking back to the highway. It took about 15 minutes to get there, but it didn't seem like I had run that far into it. I got into the SUV and drove around the highways for an hour and a half before finding my way back home. When I got home, Ryan was not there. I was far too worried to search for him, so I slept for 10 hours to escape the terrible feeling Datura was giving me. The next day I felt like shit and called around to find out if anyone knew where Ryan was. It turns out that Ryan was in the hospital with his spine cracked after having been found by my neighbor. Apparently, the cops had never showed up. Indecently, there was no cornfield in my backyard. My gutter was hanging off of my roof, and my house was a mess. The owners of the SUV reported the car stolen, and even though I returned it and explained, they still insisted on pressing charges, and now I am going on trial for car theft. So basically, Datura kind of fucked my life up, and I never plan on doing it again. Okay, so I think I almost fucking died from using Datura. Here where I live, there's an abundance of it. I took about 4 moonflowers and made a brew. It was about 6 p.m., so by the time I started tripping, my parents would be asleep. But anyway, after about an hour and a half, I started to feel it. I started off by feeling very heavy. Small text was too blurry to read, and I cannot justify the state of my mouth. My mouth and throat were so dry, I could barely talk. It felt similar to a DPH trip, except for the blurred vision. I didn't have any closed-eye visuals, yet I had full-blown delusional hallucinations with my eyes open. When I really started to trip, I gathered every ounce of strength I had and stood up to go get some water. But there was a man standing in front of my door, blocking my exit. I started talking to him about something, then snapped back to reality and closed my eyes and said you're not there, and continued on my mile-long journey for water. I kept talking to people who I know, but they weren't there. At one point, my ceiling started to stretch up into the sky to the point of infinity. My arms and legs were now so heavy, I could barely even move a finger. And even when I tried to, I felt drunker than I had ever been in my life. I kept getting cold flashes and passed out. I woke up in the ER with a pretty hefty bill, and it said something about a drug-induced seizure. you know what to do. Go like that video and comment down below. Subscribe too if you haven't already. I have so many other Datura videos on my channel that you'll be set for hours, maybe even days. Let's move on to the next story. This occurred 2 weeks ago, and I still feel some of the effects. It was a Saturday afternoon when my friend came to visit, carrying a bag of Datura seeds. At the time, I wasn't very informed on the effects of the drug, other than this will make you trip. So being stupid, I decided to take it with him, something I would soon regret. He opened the bag of seeds and said we'll do half each. Couldn't really tell you how many seeds there were or what type of Datura we took, but it definitely was more than enough. I'd estimate around 30 to 50 seeds each. Once we consumed the Datura, we sat down and watched a movie. I'd say around 1.5 hours in, I started to feel extreme cotton mouth. It felt as if my tongue had no coating, and no matter how much water I drank, it felt like my tongue was bleeding when it hit the roof of my mouth. Not a pleasant feeling at all. Still, I felt no effects similar to LSD or mushrooms, which I have experimented in the past with. I fell asleep soon after the movie finished, thinking nothing of it, and that we must have took too little. I woke up not soon after, and was extremely disoriented. I tried to wake my friend, but he was no longer next to me. I had the sudden urge to urinate, and stood at the toilet for about 20 minutes, incapable of the luxury of relieving myself, so I gave up. Knowing I was tripping, I decided to look in the mirror, as I enjoyed doing so on LSD and mushrooms. However, what I saw was nothing. I had no reflection, which scared me quite a lot. I started going into a panic in which I saw the floorboards quite literally open up, like some sort of gateway to the Underworld. I saw hands and feet through the floorboards, and it looked like my friend. So I tried to jump into the hole I saw in order to reach him, but the harder I tried, the more weak I got, and eventually, I passed out. Waking up not soon after yet again, I was in a different room that I could not recognize. I am not a smoker, but for some reason, I had the sudden urge to smoke a cigarette. Although my friend was a smoker, and it could have possibly been his cig that I was smoking, I believe that I didn't smoke it at all. This is when the trip hit a new level of terrifying. I saw an old man who seemed lost and alone. I hugged the man for whatever reason and attempted to comfort him. He looked like a lost soul. Looking back on this moment of the trip, I believe I was really just trying to comfort myself. The old man I saw was really just a mirror of my frightened ego and mind. I don't know, just something to think about. Still inside the house, I believe I started feeling spiders crawling on my skin, so I stripped all my clothes off and remained the rest of the trip naked. Blood was pouring out of my pores, and I could see the darkness of my eyes through a third-person view. Unfortunately, this is all I remember and can recall from the experience. According to my mate, he never felt the Datura and actually completely lost me, so I'm not quite sure where I was when I experienced this. Thank you for listening, and if you can take anything from my experience, I'd highly regard Datura as one of the most powerful compounds in the universe, and should not be taken lightly. I've never been a strong responder to anticholinergic deliriants for whatever reason. I've tried DPH and various other antihistamines before brugmansia. I've even tried Datura stramonium seeds. None of them ever did much for me beyond a horrid body load and dysphoria, hardly ever any hallucinations. Then there's brugmansia. There's a brugmansia tree a couple of blocks away from me, and one day I decided fuck it, maybe this one will work. I harvested 2 leaves and a flower. I cut them up and made a tea out of them at around 7 p.m. Sunday night. Lady Datura clearly was trying to spare me the previous times I tried it out of pity, but this time, she must have gotten tired of my shit. I was not prepared for what was about to happen. Within 15 minutes, the signature cottonmouth and body load began to manifest. I struggled to my bed and sat down. Within 30 minutes, dysphoria began. At this point, I stopped keeping track of time, so the details get murky. The dysphoria just got worse and worse, and coupled with the body load made me scared shitless. After a while, it was so unbearable that I decided to just go to bed to end the experience. This is where I think I insulted Lady Datura, because the moment my head hit the pillow, everything went to shit. Part 1. Rating consumers under Datura's watchful eye. A voice started yelling at me, "Coward," and "Get up, stupid, I'm coming for you." After this, I blacked out, thinking I had managed to sleep. The next thing I remember is sitting in my consumer studies class taking a test. I am writing in an almost trance-like stream of consciousness way, not once looking up from the paper. Then I heard a banging sound and a voice. "Are you okay in there?" This caused me to look up from my paper. I wasn't in the consumer's class anymore. I was in my bathroom. I heard another knock on the door and the same voice saying, "What's going on? Do you need help?" As that happened, the walls started closing in on me, and I knew I had to get the hell out of there. When I opened the door, I saw my mother, but her flesh was rotting and melting, and I screamed for help. According to my mom, I had been in the locked bathroom for hours, muttering gibberish and the occasional fragment of my consumer set work. I black out again. Part 2. A trip to the lab. The next thing I remember is being dragged out of a white van into a windowless concrete building. This was actually my mom's car in the hospital. Upon arrival, I was sat down in the lobby. I don't remember when they started trying to administer a nasal COVID test, but I just remember a really primal fear and the activation of my flight reflex when I saw it. They tried to shove it up my nose, but I was just not having it. It took 5 people to restrain me when they finally managed. After this, I was out on a cocktail of sedatives administered through a drip. Apparently, I managed to stay awake for hours despite that, and the doctors telling me to sleep. I did nod off eventually at around 4 p.m., I was told. Part 3. Waking up in purgatory. After waking up, my mind was in a complete sedative-induced haze. I couldn't focus on anything, and my vision was very blurry. What I remember most vividly were all the flies in the room with me, on the walls and floors. I convinced myself that I had died, and I was in purgatory. My reasoning was that hospitals are hygienic, and there were flies in this one, so it had to be a fake hospital. I snapped out of it when the doctor came in to explain the dangers of anticholinergic delirium. 6 out of 10 drug, kinda anxiety-inducing, may try again. Just kidding. I want to emphasize right from the start that my one-time experience with Datura was by no means pleasant. I'd heard that hallucinations and such could be achieved by eating some of the seeds. A friend of mine who knew where some could be picked got a baggie full of seeds and gave it to me. 3 other people that I worked with also wanted to try it. We all ate about a tablespoon of seeds and went home. Nothing about this experience was pleasant. Physically, the severe dehydration was without a doubt the worst I have ever experienced. I could pretty much stand in front of the toilet with a quart of water and begin drinking it with it going straight through me. This would last the entire duration of my trip. Trip is not exactly the word I'm looking for, but it's the best I can do. I tried to go to sleep, but everything was kind of blurry and surreal. After a while, into the bedroom walks a friend of mine that I hadn't seen in a while. We chat a bit. I'm trying to be quiet so as to not wake my girlfriend. Into thin air, he disappears, although this doesn't seem too strange to me. A short while later, in comes another friend, who soon disappears in the same fashion. The only thing that struck me odd about this entire parade of people marching into my bedroom was that my girlfriend hadn't gotten mad and kicked all of us out. A couple of times she did poke me and tell me to shut up, but that was only because I was doing all the talking. I had several visits that night. Another thing that I kept doing, as did a friend on his experience, was to try and light a cigarette, but start thinking about something and never get it lit. Then a bit later, try to smoke it. I'd realize it wasn't lit and start to light it without getting the job done, over and over and over. On one of my many excursions to the kitchen for more water, then straight to the bathroom, I passed by a friend standing in the corner with a paper bag over his head, just standing there. I said hello on my way, but this didn't seem unordinary at all to me. Everything was as it is in a dream, kind of vague and unreal. A couple of times I started to get ready for work, even though I didn't have to be in for several more hours. Luckily, there was a voice of reason somewhere in my head that explained that I wasn't needed at work, not for quite some time yet, and I went back to bed. I'm sure that would have made quite a spectacle, showing up for work in that state I was in. The entire experience lasted for about 15 hours, except for my eyes being so dilated that I couldn't even read a newspaper. This lasted about 3 days. I wasn't sure if my vision would ever return. I will never try this again, and urge anyone considering trying it to not do it. I can tell you firsthand of the toxicity involved, and that I consider myself lucky to have gotten off so easy.